Hey,
Hey, Josh. I didn't get much response to the email I sent to the OCI distribution, so I figured I would try over here, but we will see if people actually show or not. People that know about garbage collection.
I don't think I got that email. Was it today?
I threw it over in the dev channel, dev distribution. It's probably in everybody's spam box.
No, I found it.
Phil, you got an office.
I'm in Seattle this week, so
Oh. Switching the time zones up in the middle of the week where all the time zones are already getting switched up.
yeah.
I think when people traditionally start a meeting at 5 minutes after, everybody starts to show up at 5 minutes after. So you almost need like a random chaos and just start early one time just to mess them up. Figure while we're waiting, I'll let people read this if they haven't had a chance to. This was over on the dev channel or in the dev list earlier. Well, I guess we made it 5 minutes after. Should we go ahead and kick it off?
Yeah, might as well. Seems like a small crowd today, but
It does. We didn't have anything on the agenda last night, so maybe people looked at it and figured they would reschedule for other stuff. Or maybe it's just that week between time zone changes when everybody on the EU doesn't realize that we moved it. or maybe we're in the wrong and it hasn't moved yet. That is the challenge. So what I'm looking at right now is basically how we're going to handle reference types and garbage collection and what happens when we start doing some weird things over there. And probably a lot easier than looking at that big text is to look at kind of a pretty picture example, which is we're trying to make things that are artifacts. I'm going to keep picking SBOM just because I think that's the least confrontational. You say signature and people want to know that's their signature versus someone else's signature. You say SBOM, people are like, okay. And so we're adding an SBOM out there on an already existing image. And so you have this little arrow that points over and says, hey, I'm an artifact for this image. And what that gives us the ability to do in the future, hopefully, is that we can run an API query and say, for this given image, tell me all the artifacts that point to it. And so you're going to have this kind of query we're going to build at some point, hopefully. That's kind of the goal we're trying to come out with. And so we're going to have a tag that points to this image, and that index points to the image, sorry. So tag to the index to the image, and then all the blobs and whatnot. And so garbage collection can look at that and realize, okay, this is a tagged index. Let me go through and recursively look through all these things and find all the stuff that points to this and know that these blobs shouldn't be garbage collected, this image shouldn't be garbage collected, and it sorts all that out for us. And when we have these artifacts, one of the goals is that the artifact itself shouldn't necessarily have to be tagged. But if it's not tagged and it has a pointer to the image, there's nothing pointing to the artifact. The registry will say, okay, we can just clean this up and delete it. But the goal that we're trying to say is, well, maybe for the garbage collection, this should be reversed. And that's why I kind of put this little hollow arrow on this side saying, logically, the index is tagged, the image is pointed to by the index. This artifact points to the image, but logically, it's the image that references this artifact. And so we want to be able to keep this in terms of garbage collection. So the references, as a result of that, kind of turn this into a reverse pointer logically for the garbage collection process. And so if we do that, the scenario we come up with is that it looks nice in this case where we do it properly. But if we ever have an index that we create on an already existing image, and the index says my target is this image, and that same index also says, oh, by the way, I also have a reference to this image, then that forward pointer over there becomes a reverse pointer, and you get this loop. And so the question I have for hopefully people smarter than me that have done this before is that loop a problem or not? If we're talking about, say, the, what was the term for it? The mark and the scan and marked term, I think it was.
Mark and sweep.
Mark and sweep, that was the term I was looking for. So we've got a couple algorithms out there in the mark and sweep. If it just goes through and it looks for everything that's been marked, as long as the marking process doesn't get stuck in that recursive loop, you're okay. I've heard other people mention that recursive counting or a reference counting is the other option that they've been looking at. If you get into reference counting, I don't know how I would handle a loop in this case. And so either garbage collection doesn't handle these reference types, which wouldn't be great. I don't think people are going to be happy if we just start going out there and deleting the artifacts. Or we need to kind of sort this case out, and different ways to do that. One is we say it's not actually a problem and Brandon go away, and that would be awesome if you can tell me that. That would be the highlight of my day. The other option is that we just say, you know, the big issue here is that the index can have a child pointer and a reference pointer to the same thing. And that's because the index points to other manifest. If instead you say, well, you can have a reference, but it's to another manifest, and this object itself can only have blobs, then we can't get into this kind of looping scenario because you can't point to one of your children because your children are only blobs, and you can't, a reference type is never a blob, it's always a manifest. So we break that loop that way. So depending on how we want to solve this, if we can say this is fine, it's not an actual big deal because the way we implement our mark and sweep is just not going to run into these kind of cases, that's awesome. Otherwise, if we are worried about it, we will be stuck with this case. And so I just kind of want to get a feeling from other people that have looked at this stuff. Do we need to worry about it? And what does that look like? So I think Phil, Tianan, not sure who else, maybe even Steve over there. Anybody, it's Sajay, whoever's been working on registry implementations before that might have a familiarity with how garbage collection and life cycle management has been maintained. Is this an issue?
The index one is an interesting one because the index one is basically, so sorry, let me start with, there's an assumption here. Let me just call out. The reason we call out life cycle versus garbage collection, because I think of garbage collection as a detail, where life cycle is more of a user intent. The fact that registries can dedupe blobs and so forth is a great optimization. Users only care because they pay for less storage when they even pay for it. For the lifecycle management, they are trying to purge content. In fact, transparency, what we went through in ACR and what I've seen many other registries deal with also is we might tell somebody we deleted it, but we didn't actually delete it yet because we didn't get to all the GCs because GC wasn't implemented in some of the core projects rather. So, but we actually got into an issue where a customer came back, so that, hey, we deleted this. We want to make sure it really is gone from a compliance perspective. So it is an important thing to actually do that. We think of the lifecycle management, the things that a user thinks about is the manifest. The manifest is the description, I won't say descriptor, the description of the thing the user deals with. It might be a digest, they might put a tag for friendly names on it. So that's why the image manifest has always been kind of like the main thing that we think about from a user's perspective. The index, the multi-arc index, is a special hybrid today where it says, hey, you have a couple of these things in the registry that users think about, reason about, but there's an aggregation atop it because it turns out the main use case, the CNAB is another one, but I'll avoid CNAB for a second. The main use case is I want to run Redis on both Windows and Linux, or pick the thing that, the image. So what's interesting there is if you delete an image manifest and there's no other blobs that reference it, the blobs get deleted. There's a cascading delete that kind of happens. If you delete an index, you're not intentionally saying I want to delete the individual architectures. So there's just an interesting caveat, at least the way I know what we've implemented in ACR, and this is similar conversations we've had with other registry operators, is deleting an index doesn't intentionally delete the children of the index today, because that's intentional, whether or not you have a forward pointer or a back pointer. Does that help with additional context? Because the image, the picture you have, is that my mouse or your, that's my mouse. That's the image you have to the right that's highlighted. That is a little more easier to track because you have a thing, the image, and it might be pointing at another thing. And the question mark, if you just said another manifest, we can call it manifest as opposed to image or artifact, because to me, an artifact is a manifest. The blobs are an implementation detail, but
they are.
But the idea that the back pointer exists is like a ref count. So you can find it if you want it, you can track it, you can delete it. But it doesn't completely map to the way indexes are today, because indexes are a special thing. Does that help?
Are you asking them to help me or help others?
In general, I mean, yeah, I guess you, because you've been the voice of this, but it's like there is a delineation between lifecycle management and GC of blobs to an image. There is no direct analogy of an image and an index. And this has been the conversation that had in the ORA's artifacts one was when we made this, the link, the subject of the manifest pointing up, that arrow you have pointed to your question mark now, what we said is if you highlight to the top, go to your top image, the green one at the very top of your page, that's a good example of, that would be the container image. And then the purple ones could be the signature and SBOM, let's just say. The thought was if you delete the image, the one you got selected, we would delete the two child artifacts, even though they're reverse pointers, because that's the concept of a life cycle. But we also said that if a registry doesn't want it, we said should, I think was the word, or may or should, so that a registry could keep those around if they wanted to, because those themselves do have life cycle of their own in the sense that they are a manifest. I don't know how to think about that with index without breaking the way indexes are used today.
So that brings up the question though of, does this mean we can't have, I'm assuming in your case, and I'll throwing out there for any case really, that we can't have a reference type of some kind that isn't index. So we always have to have one of these image artifacts that has the references off of it. And we can't have references ever coming off of an index, in your case at least, and potentially any case.
So in Aura's artifacts, we did say the purple thing, if that's an artifact that has a reference type, let's just call that, it has a, in what we in Aura's we call a subject.
That's what it is.
So in that case, that absolutely can point to an index also. The subject can be any manifest. If you wanted to create a new manifest tomorrow, that would absolutely work. Of course, the manifest, generally speaking, manifests have to be understood by a registry, because that's how the registry does lifecycle management. But the way the subject, the definition of a subject is any manifest. There's no limitation.
So you can point to an index, but you can't point from an index, which means that your artifacts, whatever they are, can't be an index themselves. They always have to be that child artifact manifest.
Today, because we couldn't come to agreement on adding properties to a manifest, an existing manifest, because I'm trying not to break into jail, a whole nother conversation. Because we weren't comfortable adding formal properties to the existing manifest, we did add the subject property to a new manifest. The new manifest is just a formalization of what was there. The hard part, which is the break into jail part, is not so much the manifest descriptions, the properties in the JSON file. The hard part is the indexing, the lifecycle management. Like that's where we're spending time in registries implementing the reference types. It's where you define that link is trivial to the whole thing. It really is just a matter of how do you define a well-defined place on that property exists so registries know how to deal with it.
I see your open container shows up. Does that mean VBAT showed up?
Probably.
It does mean VBAT showed up. Welcome. Yeah, so to kind of throw this a little bit more into context, I think your proposal, Steve, and probably a few others are okay just saying we're defining the artifact down here and it has a reference type on it, but we're not going to put the reference types on these other objects. I think Nisha's with hers was a little bit more generic, and we're also looking at another one where we're proposing putting reference types everywhere. Those scenarios where we may have to limit down just to make it work for not breaking registries.
I mean, to be clear, just because you said my proposal is one versus the other, it's not that we wanted to create a new manifest per se. It's that we wanted to create a well understood behavior to know how to deal with these things. So we didn't just jam stuff in registries that they get so screwed up they don't know how to manage them. So it's the direction we took was because of the direction and the guidance that we got by the group on where changes could be made.
Yeah.
So the gap that we have today absolutely is a gap, is the reference type defined by Aura's only works if the registry implements the Aura's artifact manifest or a new manifest. I don't even care. The name was named because we didn't get approval to put it under OCI.
Yeah.
So
I'm just going to call them artifacts, and as long as they're an artifact that they can't point to other manifests, they can only point to
yes,
or
that is the
reference can be a manifest, but the content of it can only be blobs, is where I'm getting at.
Oh, I see.
That's where we landed with the current implementation, because the artifact itself has a blob, right? You can think of it like it has a signature SBOM or something.
Or it may not actually. It has, most cases it has.
That's what I said, can have a blob.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
the point here is that if you drop the image, there is still a discussion whether you want to keep the SBOM around, which you should be able to do. The other conversation we're having is you should be able to push the signature without pushing the image. So what does the GC look like for that? So there are a couple of conversations that haven't been kind of like totally ironed out as to what the behavior should be. And we've never kind of like gone down the index path primarily because of this, because the index can point to an image, and index can point. If we make it point to a reference, then you do have exactly the loop that you mentioned at the bottom. And we've tried to keep the index away from being able to attach signatures to indexes themselves in some way. And that's why I think the assumption—
there's nothing limiting that. I think Toddy was bringing up some cases where I think we do want to sign the index. but there's.
No, this is about modifying the index itself. This is
Oh,
not
sorry.
about signing
The
the
index doesn't have, yeah. OCI index, OCI image, we did not add properties to it because we were told no.
Yeah.
So that's the direction where we landed. And quite
But-
frankly, even if we were told yes, I think, because I know that's the conversation we're starting to have with the reference types. I think the big furball that we have to unravel is, what does that mean if we add them? Is that a new version? Is that an optional? If we make it optional, what a registry is expected to do with it? So it just breaks into jail the whole versioning thing. So that's why I've always said, it's not just about adding properties to the existing manifests. It's what is the versioning story for these?
Go ahead, VPATs.
I just wanted to clarify that loop would be basically not quite a hash collision, but a guess, right?
No, sadly it isn't. I was describing in the email that it was an index, but just assume this is an artifact. You're going to have something you're pointing to. Let's call it dead beef, just because I don't have a lot of good creative names for SHA hatch names. And so in what we think of today as an index, it's going to have a list of manifests in there. And one of those manifests in there, you can point to and just say, I'm pointing to dead beef. And it's going to have a list of references. And you could also say that reference is dead beef. And what happens when we do this is the whole idea of the artifacts we were trying to do was create this picture up top. We said we're going to have an index multi-platform image. We've got our individual images out there. These images might have an artifact point to them. You could even have this artifact point over to the index. These all have blobs. And from garbage collection standpoint, if you don't treat this pointer as a reverse pointer, then you would go out there and say, well, there's nothing pointing to the artifact. We've got a tag point to the index, but there's no tag point to the artifact. So let's just delete it. So the better scenario here is that we say, let's treat this as a reverse pointer for the garbage collection standpoint. This SBOM that's pointing to the image is really something that the image has as a child of itself. And so you want to keep this around as long as the image is around. And so you get this case where while both pointers are pointing from the artifact to the manifest, the second reference pointer is treated as a reverse pointer. And that's where this loop gets created. And so you don't have to have a hash collision, you just have to have a bad person creating the artifact.
Is this a negative test case in the sense that, is there a valid scenario where we're worried about breaking, or there's a hole that we have to protect against that is really just how does somebody screw up a registry?
I think it's the latter. I want to protect against somebody putting up a potentially malicious registry or potentially bad manifest up to a registry that just breaks everything.
Because if it's a non-supported case, but a technically incapable because of the way the property is defined, and I'm still struggling to wrap my head around exactly how it has. Part of the ref counting allows you to just figure out, did you ever get to zero? And if you don't, you leave it, and you could, in theory, flag the bad bees in your registry and decide, like, I delete corrupted data.
I think we're missing the point here. According to this, the ref count on that manifest is 2, because it's both a reference and a pointer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you delete the artifact, the manifest will not get a ref count just because of that SHA. You need to mark and sweep here. Most of us don't implement mark and sweep. So we could, but it'll take a long time to do that. So
what is the ref count here, though? If I create this artifact,
according to your text document before, you had said that that index would point to the manifest, as well as the reference would also be the manifest. So there are.
Let's say that I've got a tag, and so before anything, I've got my tag sitting over here that just says tag X points to this manifest. It's good. It works. Everything's fine. And so the manifest has probably a ref count of 1 at that point. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And then if I add this artifact to it, and it's got this reverse pointer, what are the final ref counts in this picture at this point?
Is your
Because this
question
pointer should be treated as reverse, right?
It depends on how you want to purge them. So if you want to say that I want to drop the SBOMs when I drop the image, then we go that way. But if you say that if I drop the artifact, I want to drop that's how index should technically work, right? You drop the index, then all the children can be purged or maybe kept around depending on policy.
We're saying index, I renamed it to artifact just because I want to be clear that this is going to be like an image manifest. this is an artifact that can point to a manifest. And that's the problem we get into, is if your artifact can point to a manifest as one of
Your
its child
artifact can
objects,
point to a manifest versus blobs. Is that kind of the differentiation?
that's the differentiator.
That's-
This
You know,
was the
this artifact
blobs
can only
and
point to
descriptors
blobs, we're
discussion.
fine.
We don't have that problem in the current proposals yet, but anything the index proposal.
Well, we do.
Oh, the
Well,
index
so
proposals.
when he says the current, so and I want to be transparent because we ventured into this. So I can't remember where we were actually. It was actually the last place I actually saw people in 3 dimensions. We were discussing this that blobs could be like, could the Aura's artifact manifest be a new index? So we said, why couldn't what we call blobs, what's currently called layers, be descriptors? And we walked into this exact conversation. Said, all right, we're not ready to carve that beast, but if we just rename blobs to descriptors, then we could, if we figured out how to make it work in the future. But everybody was really nervous around how do you do exactly what you're suggesting. So this is why putting subject on index is problematic. And quite frankly, we haven't fully identified a use case for it. So that's why even as close as we got to it with ORAS, where we rename blobs to descriptors, we stopped by saying that it was a property name change, but the behavior didn't change. And we actually reverted it because it was going to be too difficult to do the name change at this point. So it is a, like, I think trying to identify why we need it would probably be a better case.
Well, we've got proposals that are talking about doing it. And so that's where I'm looking at, do we want to narrow down those proposals, or do we need to just say that it's not an issue? And I think if we're saying it's an issue, then we can go back and say, let's narrow down the proposals. Because the case, Sajay, I think going back to our discussion, manifest starts with a ref count of 1. It then goes in and increments the artifact, because by this reverse pointer, artifact now has a ref count of 1. This has a child of manifest. So now we're up to ref count of 2 on manifest, and repeats infinitely, I believe.
Yeah, so the proposals with index does have this problem. And I think I'd echo what Steve said, which is if we have a use case for this, then maybe it's worth discussing. But I think we should discuss when would an index want to point to a manifest. To your point, I think guarding this at one level is one, but you could still have the manifest be, like, you could have one more level of indirection. So the artifact can point to an index that points to another manifest. So you can have 2 levels of problems there. So pointing to an index by default will create these problems. So I'm leaning on this is a tough one to crack at this point. So unless we have a real use case for it, don't make artifacts point to manifest might be a reasonable ask.
That arrow right there is the whole problem. It's the arrow that says an artifact can have a child that's a manifest.
Right.
As long as you get rid of that arrow, then we have no issues.
Oh, and it's that you do both. So for instance, if we keep, so let's just say multi-arc is a good thing, not just for container images, but for, Debian packages or NPM packages or whatever, right? Like let's say there are platform specific things that are not just container images. So the index is a good idea. The question is, does the index need to have a subject to point to something else? The idea is that if you do have 2 manifest types, the artifact manifest and the index as being the 2, because the artifact manifest that we've been playing with is basically a superset subset of image that is today. So you have a single artifact and a collection of artifacts. That's where the index kind of works today. And the collection is based on a pivot. Either one of them, you want to be able to put children that are individual things, individual SBOM, individual signature, that it is referring to the thing. I want to be able to sign the container. I want to be able to sign the index. So the premise is we still have 2. I think what we're kind of realizing is we couldn't quite get to one manifest to rule them all, which was part of Justin's number 37, if you remember, right? We had 27, 29, then 37. I think thinking all the way through with realizing this is we couldn't get to 2 because we couldn't get to 1. So we landed on 2, index and a manifest that knows how to define a thing. And it says that thing, an artifact, can also refer to another thing. That other thing it refers to can be another artifact, container image, or it could be a multi-arc. but a multi-arc thing itself doesn't have a way to be a subject to something else. An index would be the top level object that's a pivot on multiple architectures. Where I think some of the proposals are venturing into this problem is they're trying to use index to bypass, or to not bypass, well, it is to bypass, to implement the concept of the referrals API. How does a registry know it's got a collection of child objects? That's kind of what an index does, but the fact that it gets persisted as a single document is the race condition problem. The way we refers bypasses this problem is the refers API is basically a way to go index stuff that's there as independent objects. There is no single document that has contention.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Kind of looking at this picture, I want to make sure it's clear that you can have an artifact pointing to an index even with this scenario, as long as the child of the artifact is just blobs. And so the reference can point to the index, but the child pointers, whatever this artifact contains, cannot contain another manifest as its child. It can only be referenced to the index. And so it's this error that's bad one. All these errors are just fine with the artifact that has a bunch of blobs.
Do you propose making that artifact a new type of artifact, an index artifact, or how would you pull off that restriction?
I think the restriction here is that we just don't allow the scenario where an artifact itself can have a child of a manifest. You say an artifact can only ever have blobs, is whatever it contains. And then we solve
on the push, or probably
it's
on
just
the side.
It's part of the schema itself of whatever an artifact can be. The schema itself is just going to say, hey, the only thing these can point to are blob descriptors
In the spec level, and then check it on the, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think
And
we
that's-
can't get to one manifest to rule them all, at least the way we've defined it so far.
I think that's just a problem we're going to run into until add in infinite. Unless someone looks at this stuff and says, hey, you're just creating a problem that doesn't exist, which I would love for someone to say, hey, we're doing mark and sweep everywhere, and mark and sweep can handle this. And so it's not an issue. Don't even worry about it. That would be awesome. Now that I've thrown that out there, are there registries that want to volunteer and say, no, we're doing reference counting on manifest, and so it is a problem, so don't even try to pretend?
Considering we have debates that we should even, we should even talk about life cycle and GC, I'm not sure we'll be able to get to that level.
Yeah, no, I'm not, I don't want to name and shame or anything along those lines. And so that's why I'm just saying anybody that wants to volunteer and say, hey, we're in that case, so please don't break us, is what I'm looking for.
Oh, you're in the case of having implemented mark and sweep is what you're saying?
Yeah, if there are any registry operators out there that say, hey, we implemented reference counting, and this would break our registry if you try to push it, so please don't even try to propose it because we're going to veto it later on. Everybody's silent, but I don't know if that's a good thing or just people don't understand the question.
Please don't put a reference on index.
So we got one volunteer. Okay.
It's a bomb. It's hard to solve.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only recent that most registries have added index. I don't want to, I don't know if they were public about it or not. So I know 2 registries that only recently added index, and it took them a year to add it because of the lifecycle management issues of it. And not that they were trying to cascade the delete, but just the issues related to, like if you because the opposite is problem. If I delete the ARM image and I have a multi-arc index that's pointing to ARM, Windows, and Linux, does that mean the multi-arc document is still there and it points to it as a dead pointer? Or does it have a ref count of 1 or ref count of 2? It itself is a ref count of 1 and the index pointing to it is another ref count. So
If you're
You
talking about distribution,
You can test that today, Steve, and the answer is yes.
Yes.
yeah, I was about to say, if you're talking about distribution today, I've done many deletes of child manifest of an index where you couldn't push the index that way, but you can put the index in that condition, and it's not fun.
No, it's not fun.
To Mike's question before, I think if we limit it through schema, saying that anything that can have a manifest cannot have a reference, it will protect you from the red arrow. That might be an easy validation to do. Otherwise, we have to go walk down the chain and make sure that the links don't exist and things like that. So that just makes it much harder.
Yeah, that's fair. I was just checking if you were proposing a new type.
I'm hoping that's the proposal.
Some people have been proposing new types and different solutions. We've got a lot of proposals out there.
Okay.
Not naming and shaming. It's just
That's us
looking at what we need to
are
do
proposing
to-
a new type because we don't know how else to do it.
yeah. So some
and-
have said new types. Some have said create a whole new thing that's the generic of everything. I think Justin's proposal was trying to be that grand unified thing and ran into this case. And so I just think I think the easy answer is we just say this on the left doesn't exist. We just make sure the artifacts only have blobs. Magic problem solved in that way.
And I know I owe this to the community. It's just that I've been busy and it's not obvious what we're going to submit, but the concept of the artifact manifest is not meant to be a third. It's meant to be the replacement of image because it handles all the image scenarios. So I know that that's a touchy subject, but my point is that we're not trying to have N level mics going, I mean, the point is not to have 50 manifests that a registry has to process. I think we're boiling down to 2. It just so happens we don't know how to transition image to artifact at this point. So we, at least for a couple of registries, have implemented the third. The third is not intended to be 3. It's intended to be a new version of the image. An image still exists. Sorry, the image artifact still exists. It's just it's the most dominant artifact in a registry by far, but it's certainly not the only.
Cool. Well, it took longer than I wanted on this, but I think I got more answers than I was expecting. So that's a good thing.
I've got enough questions. I think I need to show up at the next call for the references work.
You can throw your questions here. We can try.
Okay. Index, can it point to an artifact?
So define point 2. Are you talking about this reverse pointer?
Well, he mentioned that a goal of artifact would be to also be able to support blobs, right? As the bottom right-hand corner. So then the question would be, are we going to have a new index?
Can that be an
type?
index?
Yeah.
This can be an index. Yes.
That's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought about he just asked that because that actually is what Brandon has defined. So an artifact has a subject. It can point to any manifest. So the idea, and I've said the image can be signed. Fine. So I put an artifact in the manifest in the registry that says it is signing. Actually, this can't exist. I take that back. This can't happen. Conceptually, if time was not a factor, I forget what movie it was. I was just watching this, or The Good Place was another fun one. The problem is that, so what I was trying to say is if you signed a index, so that purple box you just put there, I can see your pointer, but the one on the mid left. If that's the signature and you're signing an index, totally valid scenario, right? Because before I pull the multi-arc index, I want to know it's signed by somebody I trust.
Agreed.
In theory, time is not a factor. The index manifest collection could conceptually contain the digest of that artifact and you would have the loop. The problem is that's not time-wise possible because the artifact has the digest of the index. The artifact is added after the index is created. So you can't go and update the index to have the artifact in it because that would change its digest. And
that would be a hash collision that BBATS is saying, hey, you guys can't even do that. Yes.
Okay. So I got myself out of my panic mode because I thought we actually had that problem, but we don't.
No, as long as the artifact itself can only point to blobs, then it can't create this pointer around to the index. And
And an
that's
artifact that
that's the key
signs
to
an
go.
index can't have that artifact in the manifest collections of the index because you can't
Yeah.
change something after the fact.
The only thing coming out of this artifact up here are blobs. And so it can point to the index, but its child can only be blobs.
Okay.
So the reference can be the index.
But just, you see what I'm saying? The index is a collection of manifests.
Mhm.
So the index has that collection of valid things to the right, the green ones, because artifact is a manifest. Technically, that purple one could be in the collection. It can't be placed in that particular collection because the sequence of creation makes that impossible.
Yeah. This requires the collision, which is very difficult.
Which we don't
Well,
want.
it's impossible.
Okay,
Right? You need
Okay.
space-time continuum of digests.
got it.
Sometimes it's fun to just draw arrows on pictures. Give them pretty colors too.
Yeah.
Not a good
Any other
palette.
questions from the gallery out there?
I want to know who's submitting the emoji.
That's the all important question. It needs to be an emoji. Definitely need an oh no emoji. VBAT, you happy?
Wait, we
Or
need to get
are you
VBATs
coming
as a
on camera?
gift to be the emoji. So we capture that head shake.
I want to know if he's happy or if he's volunteering to submit the emoji.
I already did that.
All right.
No, I like I like it. I like the discussion, but I was also shoving food in my mouth while you were talking, so it's good. I like the discussion. I like where it's going.
So we're taking you to a good place. We're not breaking everything in the registries in the process. That's my whole goal. I just don't want to break all the registries.
Yeah.
If I do that, it'll be a very sad day for me.
That's fair.
I have to wonder if there's some way we could get this in front of the eyes of more actual registry implementers, and
Yeah.
especially the implementers of the garbage collection in those registries, some of whom have probably moved on from even thinking about it.
That's why I was coming here today and also through the email on the mailing list. But
Yeah,
Yeah, that was my only thought too. I mean, we have no formal way to to get things. I mean, you did the right thing. Like we do have a good cross section of folks in this community from the registry operator space, but I guess it's hard to know as we move forward with any of these things, like how can we be a little more formal in getting kind of I don't even know what you want to call it, like a pretty strong response rate, I guess, from like all the major operators.
The distribution group, the distribution, CNCF distribution has been a good group because there's, I don't know what percentage, there's some reasonable percentage of people that do implement distribution. So there's a set of folks that do appear there. But folks are busy. That's kind of what the winds up coming back with. So it's,
yeah, I haven't seen them even having meetings lately.
we haven't, like I've set up the initial kind of recurring meetings, and for a bit we had them because when it first got donated to CNCF, there was a lot of engagement to make sure like the test cases and other stuff got done. And then there was a security thing that there was some activity around, but there's activity. It's mostly just async.
Yeah. I took the effort to start looking through distribution to see how it does garbage collection. I think it is kind of mark and sweep, but I feel like I uncovered a few bugs just looking through at least the version of code that I have. So I might have to put some test case together and see if I can break the garbage collector or not. I think when I'm deleting by tag, I don't see it descending the index down to the child references.
Tag is another ref count. Like you could, if you
Yeah,
have a
but-
tag, you like just because I hate this one because we actually just were running this the other day when we're implementing the graph of artifacts in the registry in the portal. Was if you delete a tag, you technically aren't deleting the manifest. The manifest is there as an untagged manifest, which confuses the hell out of users because users don't want to think about digests.
But to take this example here, where I think this is what a lot of people think of, they got a multi-platform image.
Yep. Or you can have
If I-
tags on the image. You have tags on the index and the image.
You can, and if you have the tag on the image, that makes things easier. But let me take the case where you don't, and I delete the
It makes it
tag to
more
the index.
obvious. I don't know if it makes it easier. It makes it more obvious that your image is, your architecture specific image is still around.
Yeah. So let's take this case here, where let me get rid of my reverse arrow on this one because this isn't a reference type. It's just tag. And index is tagged. So index has a reference to it. It descends and says all of these things are in the reference list, but it doesn't actually descend into the image and say, let me look at all your blobs, at least when I first looked at it. And so I think there might be some cases where things on the garbage collector over there, at least the version I had, maybe I need to fetch a newer version of it. Someone might have patched it since then. I need to go through and do some more debugging and test cases over there to see if I saw issues or not. But Samuel, yeah, if you'd like me to, I can throw this picture over on the OCI Slack as well.
I thought he was talking about the emoji.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
More-
oh no, should be over there as well. That's good as
Yeah,
well.
more important topic.
That is an important topic.
In this bottom right-hand corner picture, you're showing the artifacts can have blobs themselves.
Yeah.
Is that
Two
in- only in the context of it's pointing to an image, or is it also in that top picture you need to show the artifact pointing to blobs? And
These
could
would
they-
have blobs up here. This would
optional.
have blobs over here as well. The artifact definition itself is I have blobs because I've got like an SBOM that's a big file that I need to tell people what to pull.
For
And
the
so-
same looping kind of scenario, is there a rule that the artifact that points to a manifest can't have or must have only orthogonal blobs to the image that it's also pointing to?
Are you saying the artifact couldn't point to one of these blobs?
Yeah, I'm asking.
I don't think we've got that restriction on there. I don't know if that would cause an issue though.
Say that again? Can you say with
I
pointer?
think Mike is asking this case here. Crazy arrow across the board.
Oh, that's valid.
I think that's valid.
And also from the artifact that's on that top image, it could also point to the same blob.
Yeah, that's just the blob ref counting. That isn't a problem because there's no real loop there.
I don't know if you would want to do that, but I don't think it's a problem if you did it. Because from index going down, remember this point is reversed. So index is going to artifact, which is going to the blob, index is going to the image, which is going to blob. There are no loops, they're just all pointing down to the blobs.
In practice, I haven't seen it much. I mean, even in concepts, the idea is a config object might be shared, or even a layer might be shared. So the scenario I kind of initially did, and the Helm team didn't want to go in this way, but if you think about Helm having a config as well as their individual charts, if you had an inheritance model. So let's say I have the Redis cache the Redis cache chart. And then I have multiple configurations of that. The chart itself doesn't change, but the fact that the config related is different for each one of those, you could in theory share the layers across all of them. They chose not to separate the config from the chart as different layers, but conceptually you could do that.
So I could mount the SBOM if I wanted to by pointing to it from the image.
In theory,
And
you could. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and I've thought of cases where I wanted to have maybe an artifact that points to all of the images because it's a multi-platform image. They might have had a multi-platform build, but they all have the same SBOM because they all pulled from the same upstream code base. And so they would all have one set of blobs, but the other take on that is, well, give each image its own artifact. That's just a small manifest and the underlying blob is the same. So
Which could be
two
a
ways to-
historical record of the index. Yeah,
yeah, two ways to solve the same problem.
right.
If you think about the part of this ref counting and lifecycle management and deduping, the deduping is about size, keep the registry reasonably sized, making sure that a client that's pulling common layers doesn't have to pull the same thing again because there's different digests, but it's the same content. So that's like the beauty, right? You pull 14 versions of things that are built in the Debian image. The Debian layers only have to come once. So that's not just a registry persistence savings, but it's a client and bandwidth savings. And then the other is, can I actually get my registry down to 0 size and get rid of the content? Not just because I'm paying for it, but is there content in there that I legally need to get rid of? So having the ability to think about what that content is from a manifest perspective is kind of core to that. Ah, the line shuffle. I actually find it therapeutic.
The image could be pointing to common blobs across all platforms or separate
Yeah.
by platform. Yeah.
Yeah. We've already got the case right now where multiple things can point to the same blob. So having an artifact doing it as well shouldn't be any difference to us.
And any registry has implemented ref counting or for blobs. There's no breaking. It works exactly in that model. Nothing's changing. It's just a manifest pointing at blobs, and the blobs say, hey, should I be deleted? Whoop, who's pointing at me? Not yet.
Okay.
All great questions, though. Good discussion. Gives me a direction to take the working group as well. Sadly, I think Nisha's not going to be happy with the answer. Which I know she was sad that she wasn't going to be able to make this meeting, and we'll have to catch her up.
You're saying which proposals we're using index to try to work around the referrers listing?
Nisha was making a whole new object that could have just references back to the same thing. So I think she's got the same reference count or the same looping kind of scenario in her proposal.
I don't know if there's ever intent, but basically you're saying that she was kind of purposely or inadvertently trying to do the one manifest to rule them all concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's what I got for the day. Any other good questions, inspiring comments? People just want to talk about SHA digest naming schemes and better terms and dead beef.
I want to see what the oh no emoji looked like.
Face.
What do you got?
Face.
What do you have against dead beef?
We want vegan sourced hashes here. Like, not all of us live in Texas.
Dead beef must be written to the top of all heaps.
Face.
It was dead bee. It's dead beef. I didn't see that. Is dead beef or bee? Like
Dead beef.
Dead beads works well too. It just doesn't make any sense. So, I like it.
You got it's a stat crash watcher.
That was where I learned it way
Dead
back
beans.
in
Oh, I love
college days.
Dead
beans vegan neutral enough for you?
Yeah,
Sadly, it's got an N, so he can't use
I was
it.
about to say, in. I added the oh no emoji.
And tofu?
That was the hard work of this call. I know that Brandon has put a lot of work into this whole conversation, but I also did a lot of work in pasting an emoji. So
I truly appreciate that as an emoji lover myself. So my life has been made better.
if nobody has read the webcomic name, it's worth spending some time to do so.
Oh no, is the webcomic name?
No. The name. Let me make this perfectly confusing.
Who's on first?
The webcomic name is named webcomic name.
Oh, okay.
So I think the URL is literally webcomic.name. And it's
Was that on the website /dot? We're just gonna go down a spiral.
The punchline for everything is oh no. Oh no, it's not webcomic.
I got a not secure.
Ajay posted
Actually, centrally
webcomic
intercepted.
in the chat.
Awesome. Anyhow, they have a book. It's wonderful. It's very relatable content. No, good stuff. I had a thought, but it's gone now. Good. No, thank you, Brandon, for leading.
Thanks for the crowd for steering us the right direction. And for at least one person being brave enough to say, don't break my registry. Cool. On that note, give people back another 4 minutes of their day.
Hey, oh, one more. Hey, Vincent, we don't hear crying babies in the background. Everybody getting to a sleeping point in your life?
No, man, this is an off week. They're in my partner and the little one and another kid are in upstate New York this week. And one of the kids is off, so the other's at school right now. So just me and 2 sleeping dogs.
Quiet to the. I was hoping you get to that point where they're actually getting to the restful point to their age. I guess not, huh?
I don't know. My oldest is almost 17, and I haven't seen that happen yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, but they lock the door and want nothing to do with you. So that's another way of restful for you. Until they terrorize you with what the hell did they do?
Fair.
Anyway,
That's fair. Oh, it's good.
all right, awesome.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.